Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're starting with a thought about the sheer power of language.
Mm,
I mean, not just the dictionary meaning of words, but how they're used, how they're deployed in our daily interactions.
right.
Just think for a moment how a seemingly small, everyday comment, or maybe a sustained pattern of interaction, can really profoundly impact a person.
Absolutely. A few good words can build up your self-worth, your confidence, your resilience.
But the flip side of that is just as powerful.
Even more so, maybe. A toxic pattern can systematically, brick by emotional brick, just erode a person's mental health, their entire sense of self.
And that's really the core tension we're going to explore today.
It is. Words are the fundamental tools of our social lives, and when they're used destructively, they become so much more than just insults.
They're weapons.
They're powerful, often invisible weapons. And these negative patterns, they generate these massive costs that go way beyond an individual's suffering.
You mean it's not just about hurt feelings?
No, not at all. They damage self-esteem, they cause real, measurable mental health crises, and they severely impact the efficiency and financial health of organizations. It even influences the national economy.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to plunge into this really complex landscape of psychological harm.
Right.
We're going to start small, analyzing those subtle verbal attacks we all encounter in everyday life. And from there, we'll scale up.
All the way up to systematic, pretty sophisticated forms of abuse. Things like the deliberate distortion of reality that we call gaslighting.
And even further into the complex, sustained organizational structure of systematic workplace hostility
Yeah.
or mobbing.
And the goal here is critical, isn't it? We want to arm you, the listener, with a comprehensive, actionable toolkit.
Yes, this isn't just about labeling the problems. It's about recognizing the mechanisms of this psychological warfare so you can actively resist them.
And then ultimately replace those destructive social dynamics. Exactly. Replace them with communication that is grounded in, well, in constructive exchange, mutual respect, and restoration. It's about moving from being a passive receiver to an active master of the interaction.
So let's unpack this. I think we should start with the smallest unit of toxicity, the one that's maybe the most insidious,
A microaggression.
the ones that quietly undermine us. These are the toxic phrases that, they operate just below our radar.
But they sow these deep seeds of self-doubt and inadequacy. They trigger anxiety, depression, and sometimes the victim never consciously realizes that those specific words were the source of that emotional drain.
Why are they so insidious? What makes them so hard to spot?
Well, they often hide behind this veneer of casualness or even, supposed helpfulness.
Right, I'm just trying to help.
Exactly that. They normalize negative self-talk. So by identifying them and neutralizing them, we stop that immediate emotional drain and we prevent them from becoming these internalized narratives that diminish our self-belief or cause us to withdraw from opportunities.
Okay, let's get into a classic example. This one sounds almost like a compliment on the surface, but it consistently lands like a punch.
I think I know which one you mean.
The phrase, "you're just lucky," or the slightly more condescending version, "you must be lucky."
Yes. The psychological damage there it's substantial. When you attribute someone's success, a promotion, a project, anything entirely to chance,
You're erasing their work.
you're minimizing their agency completely. You're basically saying their sustained effort, their preparation, the long hours, their sacrifices, all of it was irrelevant.
And this taps right into a key psychological framework, doesn't it? Something called a locus of control.
Absolutely. When someone externalizes your success by calling it luck, they're forcing you to adopt an external locus of control.
Meaning you don't feel like you're in the driver's seat.
Precisely. If your achievements are just due to luck, then you're not truly responsible for them. And crucially, you can't reliably replicate them.
That's devastating.
It is, because it diminishes that essential sense of accomplishment. It steals the credit right out from under you.
I can just imagine dedicating, say, 6 months to a complex project, executing it flawlessly, delivering results way above expectation.
And then someone just dismisses it.
Wow, lucky timing.
Mm.
It doesn't just feel unfair, it would actually make me question if I have the skill to do that again.
Exactly. If effort doesn't matter, then why bother putting it in next time? This subtle dismissal just chips away at your motivation for future success.
So what's the resistance strategy? How do you fight back against that?
It has to be active self-affirmation. You have to internalize and repeat the counter-affirmation to yourself. I worked hard for this, I was disciplined and focused, and I deserve this success.
And this isn't about being arrogant.
Not at all. It's a necessary protective mechanism. It reinforces your internal locus of control, ensuring you continue to trust your own competence and your own dedication.
Okay, let's move to another one. The thief of joy. The
Yeah.
toxicity of comparison. This often comes phrased as, why can't you be more like X? Or person Y handled this so much better.
This is so deeply damaging because it's a direct attack on your uniqueness and your identity.
You're being measured against someone else's yardstick.
An external and often idealized standard. Whether it's a colleague's efficiency or a family member's perfect social media life, it forces your focus onto what you supposedly lack.
Deficiency. Failure.
It triggers intense feelings of inadequacy, inferiority, and eventually just worthlessness.
What's so interesting is that the standard they choose is often completely unrealistic or just irrelevant to your own path.
We are unique individuals. We have unique operating systems, different strengths, different goals. You're not meant to be a carbon copy of someone else.
So the solution has to be a pretty radical psychological shift.
It does. Instead of perpetually looking outward and trying to morph into somebody else's highlight reel, you have to focus entirely inward.
On being the best version of yourself.
The best version of yourself. The practical solution here involves 2 steps. First, make sure your goals are calibrated to your unique interests and skills, not what someone else expects of you.
And what's the second step? The immediate countermeasure when you feel that sting of comparison.
Yes. When you catch yourself in that comparison trap, that negative cycle of thinking, you have to pause and execute a mental override.
Wow.
Immediately list 3 things you are genuinely proud of, or 3 specific things you've successfully achieved or done well in the last week.
It's a deliberate cognitive exercise.
It is. It instantly leverages positive affirmation to override that negative spiral. It pulls your focus back to your own documented growth and your own inherent worth. Your value is defined by your personal trajectory, not by someone else's position.
That brings us neatly to a tactic you call judgment in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
This uses questions to imply there's something wrong with you. Things like, are you really going to wear that? Or did you actually think that was a good idea?
The impact here is immense because it weaponizes doubt. It suggests that your choice, your clothes, your haircut, a professional decision, an opinion is fundamentally wrong, or embarrassing, or unwise.
And the person saying it might even frame it as, constructive criticism.
Of course, but over time, the effect is a generalized reduction of confidence across all areas of decision-making.
It trains you to feel this perpetual self-consciousness, doesn't it? You start anticipating critique before you even act. It's like anticipatory shame.
That's a perfect way to put it. It turns the simple act of self-expression into a constant risk assessment.
So the affirmation against this has to be pretty robust.
Unwavering. You need to internally affirm your choices. I trust my instincts, I like my style, and I feel good about this choice. This confidence protects your unique preferences and it prevents that insidious erosion of your general decision-making abilities.
You're reclaiming the right to your own judgment. And finally, in this section, let's discuss emotional invalidation. This can be one of the most fundamentally destructive phrases out there. Don't be so dramatic.
Devastating. It's devastating because it attacks the very authenticity of a person's inner life.
It's saying your feelings are wrong.
It systematically dismisses and invalidates the victim's emotional reality. It suggests their feelings are exaggerated, unwarranted, or just inappropriate for the situation.
And if this happens over and over again, what does the victim start to internalize?
They internalize shame and embarrassment for having strong or complex emotions. The consequence is a profound disconnection from their authentic self.
It stifles them.
Completely. It stifles their ability to express themselves openly and truthfully. It forces them to minimize their distress or just withdraw entirely. They start to believe they don't have the right to feel deeply or express pain openly.
And we have to emphasize, it is necessary and healthy to feel deeply. Emotional depth is a core part of the human experience.
That's the key truth to hold on to. Emotions are valid. They're important signals. The affirmation here is essential for reclaiming that right to self-expression.
What is?
My feelings matter, they are valid, and I have the right to express them authentically. Honoring your emotional reality is the ultimate form of self-esteem protection against those who want to shrink your experience.
That transition takes us perfectly from these microaggressions, the single words that chip away, into something far more systematic, more sustained, and just fundamentally damaging.
Gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Yeah.
This is where the stakes escalate dramatically.
Oh, yes. This is not just lying or, an occasional disagreement. It is a highly specific psychological manipulation tactic.
Designed to do what exactly?
It's designed to disorient, to destabilize, and to fundamentally undermine a person's grasp on reality, on their memory, their perception, their self-consciousness. It's a slow psychological dismantling.
And the name is so evocative. It comes from the 1938 play and then the film Gaslight.
Right, where the perpetrator systematically manipulates his wife's environment, specifically the gas lantern lights. He dims them and blightens them.
And then denies any change is happening.
Exactly. The goal is to make her doubt her own senses, to make her believe she is going insane.
And that scenario just captures the essence of it perfectly.
It does. And a critical prerequisite for this manipulation to even work is a relationship of trust or dependency.
It has to be someone you're close to.
It has to be. The abuse works because the victim wants to believe the perpetrator. They need the stability of that relationship to function. The abuser leverages this trust to systematically cause the victim to doubt their own memory, their perception, and eventually their sanity.
So we're talking about techniques that go way beyond a simple argument over who said what last week.
Oh, absolutely. These are systematic methods of distortion.
Like what?
Techniques include the outright denial of verifiable events that never happened, you imagined it, or you always exaggerate everything. But a particularly sophisticated and damaging technique is the reversal of roles, where the gaslighter accuses the victim of the very behavior the gaslighter is engaging in.
There's an acronym for this behavior, isn't there? One that's highly relevant.
Yes, and it's important to define it for clarity. It's DARVO.
Darvo.
It stands for deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender.
Could you walk us through that?
The perpetrator denies the abuse ever happened. Then they attack the victim for even daring to bring it up.
And then the reversal.
And then they reverse the roles, claiming that they are the true victim of the situation. They'll often accuse the actual victim of being overly sensitive or controlling or mentally unstable.
It's complete moral inversion.
It is. It's designed to paralyze the victim with confusion and guilt.
That's the intellectual component.
Mhm.
But gaslighters also use the physical environment, just like in the play.
Absolutely. Another insidious method involves manipulating objects, moving keys, hiding documents, subtly changing meeting times, turning off lights.
And then when the victim expresses confusion,
The abuser blames them for being disorganized or scattered or having a poor memory. The motive underpinning all of this is pure power and control. It's the desire to destabilize the other person so profoundly that they become entirely reliant on the abuser's version of reality.
and this inevitably leads to profound social isolation, doesn't it?
Yes. Gaslighters are masters at instrumentalizing other people. They'll triangulate, they'll use friends, colleagues, family to confirm their manipulated version of reality.
How do they do that?
They present the victim to others as erratic, unreliable, or always getting things wrong. This just accelerates the victim's self-doubt because now they're facing skepticism from their own support network,
So they feel completely alone.
which results in profound social isolation, which in turn makes them even more dependent on the gaslighter.
Let's pull this into different contexts because while we often discuss it in personal relationships, it's highly relevant in professional settings.
In the workplace, gaslighting is a covert weapon. A manipulative supervisor or a colleague might systematically deny the victim was ever assigned a certain task.
Or blame them publicly for forgetting a meeting they were never told about.
Exactly. Or critique their competence based on goals that were never clearly established in the first place. This leads directly to decreased productivity, career damage, high team tension, and eventually employee turnover.
The victim, confused and doubting their own capabilities, becomes easier to marginalize.
Or push out entirely.
And then there is the highly specific and deeply concerning phenomenon of medical gaslighting.
This is perhaps the most vulnerable context for a victim because they are actively seeking care. They're seeking stability.
Right.
Medical gaslighting happens when patients feel their symptoms are entirely invalidated, dismissed, or wrongly attributed to psychological causes by medical professionals, often without appropriate examination or follow-up.
And this phenomenon has historical roots tied to gender and social bias.
It does. Historically, symptoms that couldn't be immediately explained were often classified under these antiquated biased concepts.
Like hysteria for women.
Exactly. And while the term is gone, the bias persists. Data consistently shows that women, trans persons, people of color, and older adults are disproportionately affected by this invalidation. For instance, women's pain is frequently undertreated or dismissed as purely emotional.
What are the severe real-world consequences of this kind of dismissal?
The consequences are catastrophic. Delayed or entirely incorrect diagnoses and treatment plans. This not only causes prolonged physical suffering, but it compounds the psychological toll.
The patient starts to doubt their own body.
They start to doubt their own physical reality. They wonder if the pain truly is all in their head, which is exactly what the gaslighter, in this case the medical system, wants them to believe.
The deep psychological toll of gaslighting sounds just utterly catastrophic. We're moving beyond mere stress into serious psychological illnesses.
The effects are severe and they're long-lasting because the manipulation attacks the very foundation of self-trust.
What kind of conditions do victims commonly develop?
We see complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD, due to the sustained relational trauma, severe depression, crippling anxiety, and in the most extreme, prolonged cases, even delusional states or psychotic breaks.
Wow.
But the most common terrifying outcome is the sensation of going crazy,
Yeah.
the complete loss of control over one's life, and the ability to trust one's own perception.
That level of systematic destruction must require a complex path back to stability. What does the healing process typically look like?
Healing is, it's necessarily a long-term process. It demands professional intervention.
What's the first step?
A crucial first step is often just the recognition of the pattern itself. And that may only happen years later when the victim gains some physical or emotional distance from the abuser.
And then therapy becomes key.
Yes. The focus of therapeutic support, which often involves trauma-focused therapies like EMDR or schema therapy, is to re-stabilize the victim psychologically.
What does that look like in practice? How do you rebuild that self-trust?
Well, the goal is to process the emotional wounds, to learn to differentiate between the abuser's reality and objective reality, and to address that internalized, gaslighted voice.
That inner critic they've created.
Exactly. It requires confronting the ingrained need for approval or stability that the abuser exploited. It's a slow process of anchoring yourself back into your own perceptions and your own feelings, validating your own reality, and ultimately reclaiming your autonomy.
So if gaslighting targets the individual's mind and perception, our next topic, mobbing, shows us what happens when that psychological destruction is institutionalized.
And weaponized across an entire organizational structure.
Yes.
That is the perfect way to frame it. Mobbing is a phenomenon of sustained, structured hostility. We have to be really clear here. Mobbing is fundamentally different from a standard workplace conflict.
It's not just two people having a bad argument.
Not at all. It is a systematic and sustained campaign of psychological terror, harassment, abuse, exclusion, and professional disadvantage. And it's directed at one person over an extended period of time.
It's psychological warfare on the job.
Enabled by the organization itself. And this destructive pattern, it's not limited by rank. It happens across all hierarchical levels. Colleague to colleague, subordinate to superior, and most commonly, superior to subordinate.
And the scale of this problem is often underestimated, isn't it? This isn't some rare anomaly.
No. We have substantial data confirming that approximately 3 out of every 100 employees are affected by mobbing at any given time.
That translates to over 1 million people.
Over 1 million people enduring this systematic abuse. And when we look at the financial fallout, the national economic cost is just staggering. It's estimated to be between 15 and 25 billion euros annually in major European economies.
That is an immense price tag on psychological harm. Let's look closer at the components of that cost. How is that production loss even calculated?
Well, the $12.5 billion in production loss alone comes from multiple factors. It includes massive sick leave rates. People are too ill or depressed to work. It involves lowered quality output and increased error rates from the victim, who is operating under chronic, debilitating stress. It also includes the costs of investigation, mediation attempts that inevitably fail because the system itself is hostile.
And the general disruption.
The constant disruption to team dynamics and morale. Mobbing forces businesses and social service providers to bear enormous costs from chronic illness, disability payments, and early retirement. It's a monumental economic drain.
Let's follow the typical progression of this, because mobbing rarely starts with an outright attack.
Yeah.
It follows an escalation funnel.
Correct. It typically progresses through 4 distinct phases. It's a slow spiral into exclusion.
What's phase 1?
Phase 1 begins with an unresolved conflict. An initial disagreement or personality clash arises, but because the organization lacks healthy conflict resolution mechanisms, it just remains unsettled.
It festers.
It festers.
Right.
And instead of a dialogue, it escalates to the point of personal blame and initial attacks.
And this is the turning point where the conflict becomes personalized.
Exactly.
Right.
And by phase two, the conflict itself fades into the background and the campaign starts in earnest. Psychological terror.
What does that look like?
The victim becomes the systematic target of harassment. This phase is characterized by social exclusion, the calculated spreading of malicious rumors, constant professional undermining, and the strategic removal of resources or information they need to do their jobs.
So their self-esteem and their ability to function just plummets.
A rapid and severe plunge. The systematic nature of the attacks is the defining element here. It's not a single bad day.
It's the relentless accumulation of slights.
It is being deliberately forgotten in key meetings, finding documents mysteriously moved, receiving passive-aggressive emails, having jokes constantly made at their expense.
It all piles up.
It piles up until the victim can no longer dismiss them as coincidence or hypersensitivity. The isolation and the pressure intensify until, in phase three, the situation hits workplace sanctions.
This is where the victim is blamed for the system's failure.
Precisely. Due to the chronic stress, the isolation, the lack of resources, the victim becomes unfocused, exhausted, and naturally, they start making errors.
And then they're officially labeled as problematic.
Unreliable or unprofessional. In a distressing 60% of all documented mobbing cases, the victim receives official administrative consequences, written warnings, demotion, forced transfers, or threats of termination.
The person being targeted for abuse is officially deemed the disruptive influence.
It's a perfect trap, which culminates in phase four, exclusion.
The mobber's goal is realized.
The victim either resigns in exhaustion, is formally fired, or is pushed into a settlement agreement. For a significant portion of victims, this marks the complete end of their functional working life.
They're just too damaged to return.
They're often suffering from severe psychosomatic illnesses, deep depression, or long-term psychological damage that requires years of recovery. It makes re-entry into the workforce incredibly difficult.
Let's turn to the profiles of the perpetrators and the targets, because the data reveals some really sharp demographic patterns in how this power is abused.
It does.
Who is the typical mobber?
The profile is starkly defined by power and longevity. The typical mobber is statistically a male superior, aged between 35 and 54, and often has long tenure at the company.
What are the numbers on that?
Statistically, 60% of perpetrators are men, and nearly 70% fall into that 35 to 54 age range. Those are the peak years for career power and influence.
And superiors are involved how often?
Critically, superiors are the exclusive perpetrators in nearly 40% of all cases, and they're involved alongside colleagues in an additional 10%.
So half the time it's coming from the top down.
It is. This confirms that the issue is often rooted in management and how leadership chooses to exercise power, or, in this case, abuse it, instead of fostering constructive conflict resolution.
It really raises profound questions about leadership training and accountability.
It does. And when we examine the targeting methods, the attacks are ruthlessly customized for maximum psychological impact. They often exploit classical gender and age stereotypes.
How does that breakdown differ between men and women who are targeted?
There's a clear gender divide in the chosen battleground. Women are typically targeted on the social level.
What does that mean?
Exclusion from social functions, the constant spreading of rumors about their personal life, and systematic undermining of their social relationships within the organization.
Why that tactic specifically?
Since women are traditionally viewed as holding strong social and communicative roles, attacks on that plane are highly effective in causing isolation.
While men are attacked where they are culturally expected to excel.
Professionally, exactly. Men are often targeted on the professional level, challenging their competence, questioning their ability to get things done, or public scrutiny of their expertise.
So it's an attack on their role as the competent achiever.
It's designed to sting the most and diminish their professional standing rapidly. It's a calculated, weaponized stereotype.
And age is also a vulnerability point. But the method of attack changes depending on if the target is young or older.
Yes. Younger workers, who are still establishing their credibility, often face harsh and unwarranted performance criticism. It makes them feel like perpetual apprentices who can never measure up.
And older workers, they have the experience, so that's harder to attack.
They do, so they face a different but equally devastating attack. Deliberate work deprivation.
They're strategically rendered useless.
They're systematically removed from meaningful projects, excluded from training, or given deliberately monotonous, simple tasks. This leads to the painful stigma of being perceived as redundant obsolete, or old iron.
And it effectively pushes them toward early retirement.
Through boredom and professional isolation.
If this systematic destruction is so widespread, it must require a fertile environment to thrive.
Hmm.
What are the organizational failures that enable mobbing?
Mobbing is a direct indicator of an unhealthy organizational culture. It rarely occurs in environments with strong ethical leadership.
It thrives in settings with significant organizational deficits.
Yes. This includes poorly organized work, chronic understaffing that leads to high stress, and fosters a destructive scapegoating mentality where blame needs a target.
So stress and frustration become internalized and then externalized onto the weakest link.
Absolutely. It also flourishes under conditions like monotonous work that leads to boredom and frustration, or, most critically, an authoritarian leadership style.
How does that style contribute?
An authoritarian leader often solves conflicts via power plays or fiat or subtle coercion. And by doing that, they actively encourage subordinates to resolve their own conflicts through power dynamics and emotional manipulation, rather than reasoned dialogue.
If management treats people poorly, colleagues feel entitled to do the same to each other.
That's the model they see. And beyond that internal failure, external pressures also create a fertile ground. External factors like chronic job insecurity and frequent corporate restructuring, new workflows, mergers, acquisitions, they create existential anxiety. Unclear responsibilities fuel competition, envy, and the inclination to gain unfair advantages by eliminating rivals.
And there's a cynical, calculated tactic in here too, isn't there?
We have to note it. Some companies utilize the stress and ambiguity of restructuring or even subtly encourage mobbing as a calculated method for silent staff reduction, forcing people to quit to avoid expensive official severance payments.
This truly is a perfect storm of internal systemic failure and external pressure.
It is.
So let's move from the workplace to the broader social arena. Let's connect all these destructive dynamics, mobbing, toxic phrases, general hate speech, to the heavy, measurable costs they inflict across society.
The fallout is severe. It spans health, professional life, and even democratic participation. We have to look at the health crisis first. For mobbing victims, the physical and psychological toll is profound.
What are the numbers?
Nearly 90% suffer physical or psychological problems. It progresses from acute stress-related symptoms, chronic sleep disorders, severe headaches, profound nervousness, to chronic debilitating illnesses.
What are some of those long-term physical effects?
The unrelenting chronic stress associated with being a perpetual target leads to deep depression, PTSD, and a host of psychosomatic issues.
Which manifest physically.
Yes, often in the cardiovascular system, persistent high blood pressure, arrhythmias, and the gastrointestinal system, like chronic irritable bowel syndrome or severe ulcers. Over 30% of cases lead to long-term illness, often exceeding a year, which necessitates long-term therapeutic assistance.
And we see similar psychological damage arising from the generalized phenomenon of online hate speech.
Which is really just gaslighting and invalidation scale up across the internet.
Right.
That's right. Data reveals that victims of online hate speech experience significant mental health challenges. 25% experience acute anxiety and restlessness, constantly checking for the next attack.
20% struggle with profound self-image issues as their identity is publicly attacked.
And 14% report suffering from clinical depression as a direct result of the abuse.
And this harm doesn't stay confined to their mental state. It affects their entire life structure.
Their careers, their education. The professional catastrophe for mobbing victims is evident in the numbers. Sanctions are common, job loss is frequent. Over 20% voluntarily quit, 15% were formally fired, and another 15% signed settlement agreements to leave.
That trajectory often leads to long-term unemployment and social decline.
It does. And for victims of online hate, the impact bleeds into real life. 17% report problems in educational settings due to distraction or harassment spillover, and 10% experience direct issues at work or even job loss. The online abuse destroys their real-world capabilities.
Finally, we have to look at the impact on democratic culture, which is perhaps the most alarming systemic consequence of hate speech.
It is. Attacks online are most frequently targeted at political views, but also appearance, origin, gender, and sexual identity. When verbal harassment is frequent, it systematically discourages participation and silences diverse voices.
And we see this disproportionately affecting vulnerable groups.
Especially younger participants, aged 18 to 24, and those with migration backgrounds who are frequently the targets.
So if the goal of democracy is a diverse, robust public debate, then this systematic suppression of vulnerable voices just weakens the quality and diversity of that debate.
Absolutely. The free expression of ideas, a core democratic function, is suppressed by the fear of being targeted and destroyed online. People self-censor, they withdraw, and the public square becomes dominated by the most aggressive, least tolerant voices.
The ability to engage constructively is just diminished.
By a hostile environment.
Okay. We have established the depth and breadth of the problem, the immense costs, and the psychological mechanisms at play. Now it's time for the pivot. We need to shift our focus entirely. The goal is to move from being passive victims of these dynamics to becoming active agents of positive change.
Starting with internal self-regulation and then moving to external constructive communication. The first non-negotiable step in changing any high-tension moment is internal. You simply cannot de-escalate others until you de-escalate yourself.
Emotional arousal destroys cognitive function.
It does.
Okay, so let's unpack that essential first step. Self-de-escalation strategies in high-tension moments. What are the immediate, practical steps we can take when we feel that adrenaline start to surge?
The techniques are deceptively simple, but they're powerful. When tension or anger begins to rise, you have to intentionally interrupt the physiological process.
Wow.
Immediately take a deep breath, deliberately slow the exhale, and use that moment to gain physical and psychological distance. Momentarily breaking eye contact or taking one measured step backward physically signals to your nervous system that you are safe.
It provides necessary space before you respond.
You are buying time to switch from emotional reactivity to rational engagement.
Once we've regulated our own system, how do we verbally interrupt the aggressor's emotional momentum?
The key strategy is asking questions. Use open-ended, non-judgmental questions that force the aggressor to switch cognitive gears.
Give me an example.
Questions like, how exactly do you mean that specifically? Or what outcome are you hoping we can achieve here? Or how can we solve this problem right now?
This interrupts their emotional flow.
And forces them to move from a purely reactive limbic mode into a cognitive, reflective one. You are subtly steering the discussion toward logic and problem solving.
And we need to ensure our response doesn't unintentionally fan the flames of defensiveness.
Crucially, that's where non-judgmental framing, or it messages, comes in. You have to substitute accusatory you messages, which always trigger defensiveness, with detached objective framing.
So instead of, you said that poorly,
You'd say, it seems like there may have been a misunderstanding, or it feels to me that we were talking about two different issues. This prevents your statement from being perceived as a personal attack.
it makes the other person significantly less inclined to put up an emotional shield.
Exactly.
I find that in many conflicts, people just want to feel heard. If that's the case, the power of active listening must be immense.
It cannot be overstated. We must utilize active listening, fully focusing on the other person without interruption, mirroring back or paraphrasing what you heard them say.
This builds essential trust.
And dramatically minimizes emotional escalation that occurs when people feel misunderstood or invalidated. When people feel acknowledged, the intensity of their anger often drops immediately.
Beyond the words themselves, we have to address the tone and the overarching goal of the interaction.
Yes, the principle of respect and restraint is paramount. Maintain a clear, polite tone, even if you are being attacked. Avoid sarcasm, irony, or rolling your eyes entirely.
Because those communicate contempt.
And guarantee escalation. Furthermore, recognize where true strength lies. It's in letting go of the desperate need to always be right or to win the argument.
That's a hard one for a lot of people.
It is, but if the conflict is purely a word battle, simply allowing the statement to stand and refusing to engage further shows profound self-control. And it often ends the verbal exchange immediately.
And finally, our silent language, the nonverbal cues.
Your body posture communicates your intention before you even speak. Avoid conflict-reinforcing gestures like crossing your arms tightly, pointing, or clenching your jaw.
Which communicate defensiveness or aggression.
Right. Instead, adopt an open body posture, arms uncrossed, body upright, and facing the person. This non-verbally communicates a willingness to engage peacefully and constructively.
And if all else fails.
Remember, if self-de-escalation fails, sometimes the ultimate strategy is simply leaving the room entirely, gaining the necessary spatial and psychological distance for the situation to naturally resolve or cool down.
Those are fantastic, immediate tools for navigating a high-tension situation. But for systemic change and long-term relational health, we need a structured framework. Let's explore the powerful antidote to invalidation, nonviolent communication.
Or NVC. NVC, often referred to as the language of the heart, is a profound and revolutionary concept developed by Marshall Rosenberg.
What's it designed to do?
It's designed specifically to promote clarity, emotional honesty, and empathy. Its foundational goal is to allow individuals to express themselves truthfully without blame and listen empathetically without hearing judgment,
Which fosters genuine cooperation.
and a willingness to contribute to mutual well-being.
This sounds like a direct counter to the cycles of shame, comparison, and invalidation we detailed earlier.
It is the architectural blueprint for connection. It teaches us how to translate internal confusion or distress into connecting language.
And it avoids that toxic habit of masking our feelings and needs behind judgments and criticisms.
And demands. It's illustrated through a 4-step blueprint for moving from inner experience to external communication.
Let's detail those 4 steps thoroughly, ensuring the listener understands the mechanism of each one.
Okay. The NVC process moves sequentially through observation, feeling, need, and request.
First, observation.
You state the concrete action witnessed, deliberately separated from any subjective evaluation or judgment. This is central to NVC because mixing observation with evaluation is inevitably interpreted as an attack.
You have to state only what a camera would record.
That's the perfect analogy. So if you see a pattern of missed deadlines, instead of saying, "You are unreliable," which is a judgment.
I would neutrally observe, I noticed 3 key deadlines were missed this week.
Precisely. You anchor the discussion in objective fact. Next is feeling. You express the inner emotional state triggered by that observation.
You connect the external event to your internal emotional experience.
Yes, and NVC emphasizes using a precise emotional vocabulary to differentiate true feelings like nervous, frustrated, concerned from veiled thoughts or judgments like I feel manipulated or I feel ignored.
Then we arrive at the heart of the message, the crucial 3rd step, need.
This is the critical engine of NVC. You identify the universal human value, things like safety, efficiency, understanding, connection, or order that is connected to that feeling.
So if I feel nervous, feeling when deadlines are missed, observation.
It's probably because you have an unmet need for reliability and order.
Why is identifying the need so powerful in a conflict?
Because it immediately moves the conversation away from blame, "You are bad," and toward genuine human motivation. We both share a need for success.
So every form of criticism or destructive communication is just a tragic expression of an unmet need.
An unskilled expression of an unmet universal human need, focusing on the need allows for shared problem solving.
That reframes conflict entirely. It's not about finding a winner.
It's about finding a way to fulfill a universal human value. Absolutely. And finally, request. You formulate a specific, positive, actionable request that the other person can fulfill now.
It has to be tangible and clear.
And stated in positive action language, what you do want, not what you don't want.
And the distinction between a request and a demand is crucial here.
It is the defining line between NVC and traditional coercive communication. A request must allow for refusal.
What happens if it doesn't?
If the refusal results in sanctions, even subtle ones like silence, guilt trips, or emotional punishment, it becomes a demand. And a demand blocks cooperation and fuels resentment.
Let's provide some complete dialogue examples using the template, because this is the section that listeners often find the most difficult to implement. The template is, when I see observation, I feel feeling because I need. Therefore, I would like to request.
Okay, let's use a personal example first. Imagine you are frustrated with clutter at home. The ineffective communication, the judgment would be, "You are so lazy, this house is a disaster. Clean up your mess."
Right, which guarantees a fight.
Guarantees it. The NVC communication would be, "When I see your shoes and coat on the floor by the front door of observation, I feel frustrated feeling because I have a strong need for order and calm in our shared space need. Therefore, I would like to request that you put your items away in the closet when you come in tonight, specifically before 9 p.m. request."
That immediately changes the tenor of the interaction. It provides honesty without being aggressive. Now let's try a professional example dealing with that colleague who is constantly interrupting you in meetings.
A great challenge. The ineffective communication, the attack is, "You are always dominating the conversation. Shut up and let me talk."
Which would not go over well.
No. The NVC communication. When you begin speaking before I have completed my thought 3 times in this meeting observation, I feel unheard and a bit demoralized feeling because I value efficiency and respect for contributions need. Therefore, I would like to request that we agree to pause for 2 seconds after the last speaker finishes before the next person jumps in request.
That's incredibly powerful. But let me ask a critical question, something our listeners might be thinking.
Please.
Doesn't using that highly structured four-part template sounds really artificial or robotic, especially in a high-stakes, fast-moving corporate meeting?
That's an essential question, and the answer is yes. If you use it as a rigid script, it will sound artificial.
So how do you use it?
The NBC framework is not meant to replace natural dialogue. It is designed to be a mental scaffold. You internalize the principles.
The principles being, is this an observation or a judgment? Am I expressing a feeling or a thought? What is the underlying need?
Exactly. And then you translate those principles into natural, flowing language. The process forces clarity of intent. You might only articulate the need and the request, knowing that the observation and feeling are the internal compass guiding your clear request.
So it's a tool for framing your thinking during high-tension moments, ensuring you don't default to attack mode.
Precisely. It guides your intention toward connection rather than coercion.
Okay, so we have the micro tools for de-escalation and the macro framework of NVC. Let's wrap up this deep dive with institutional and personal strategies for mobilizing against systemic toxicity like mobbing.
Let's give the listener actionable steps for profound change.
For the individual who is currently a victim of severe toxicity or mobbing, what is the single most important first step?
Breaking the isolation. You have to understand that mobbing thrives in secrecy and silence. Immediately seek allies, trusted colleagues, family, or friends to confirm your reality and break that sense of isolation that the mobbers seek to create.
They need external validation that their experience is real to counter that gaslighting effect.
Exactly. They must also pursue both internal and external support simultaneously. Internally, this means seeking counseling or therapy to cope with the severe psychological strain.
That externally.
Externally, it means utilizing formalized structures like union representation, specialized anti-mobbing counseling, or legal aid immediately. Do not try to handle a systemic problem alone.
And the importance of radical self-care to avoid burnout in such a consuming scenario?
It is paramount. Mobbing is designed to become all-consuming, to make you feel perpetually under attack. Employing stress-reducing techniques like rigorous exercise, meditation, or relaxation exercises is necessary to prevent the consuming psychological burden from taking over your life.
Which is often the mobber's goal.
To see you disintegrate, you must actively protect your energy reserves.
Now, if mobbing is systemic, the solution has to be structural. How do organizations counter this threat preemptively?
The organizational response must be comprehensive and non-negotiable. Prevention is far easier than combating established mobbing campaigns.
What are the key measures?
Key prevention measures include creating fully transparent organizational structures with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. This eliminates the ambiguity and high-stress environment that allows for scapegoat opportunities and diffuse hostility to fester.
And leadership has to do more than just pay lip service to anti-bullying policies. They have to actively model the behavior they want to see.
Precisely. Leaders must consciously model behavior that prioritizes dialogue, mediation, and healthy conflict resolution over power plays and blame. Furthermore, the organization needs two critical structural pieces.
What are they?
First, a clear anti-mobbing operational agreement, or service agreement, that defines mobbing, outlines clear internal investigation procedures, and includes defined severe sanction steps, transfer, demotion, or termination against perpetrators.
And the second structural piece is accessibility.
Yes, they must implement a formal, confidential, and highly accessible complaint system. Employees must trust that the system will protect the victor and hold the perpetrators accountable, regardless of their rank or seniority. When management is seen to use power to solve conflicts, subordinates will inevitably follow this toxic example in their own interactions.
We have traveled the full spectrum today, from the single toxic word that chips away at self-worth to the systemic isolation of gaslighting and the institutional destruction of mobbing.
We've armed you with immediate de-escalation skills, the psychological understanding of concepts like Darvo and locus of control, and the structured empathy of nonviolent communication.
And remember the staggering cost. These destructive dynamics are not mere interpersonal skirmishes.
They represent billions in economic loss, deep personal trauma leading to chronic physical illness, and the systematic erosion of diverse democratic participation. The ability to recognize, confront, and transform these toxic dynamics is arguably one of the most vital, life-altering skills you can master in the modern, hyper-connected world.
As we conclude this deep dive, consider this final provocative thought. Psychological attacks succeed when they cloud the fundamental human element, the underlying unmet need for things like safety, understanding, or connection.
Mm.
If we could commit in every single conflict to replacing destructive communication patterns with a constant curious focus on the underlying unmet needs, our own and others, how many of these toxic cycles would simply collapse?
Consider the radical power inherent in prioritizing the fulfillment of those universal human needs over the desperate, often controlling need to simply be right or to win a temporary verbal battle. That transformation, shifting the focus from blame to need fulfillment, is where true strength lies and where restorative relationships begin.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this knowledge serves as both your guide and your shield.